Ah, the music has started,
It's you.
and it's time for our show to start. You are listening to and watching 914 Wired. I am Mardina Sood, along with Charlie Stern. Peter
Hello,
Moses
Ardina.
is Peter Moses is off for the day, but we do have Hugh Schwartz and Carol Allen, and we're going to talk about Edgemont. And I just want to share this with the audience. When I first contacted Hugh about this story, within the first, I would say, 60 seconds of the conversation, he corrected all of my assumptions and what I thought that I knew about Edgemont, because we had done a show previously on Edgemont, and I, along with others, was working under the assumption that Edgemont wanted to secede from the governance of Greenburgh. And I couldn't have been more off base. So I'm going to let Hugh tell me where I was wrong and others were wrong and how we stand today.
Tee this up, Hugh, because this is a complicated story's been rolling around Westchester for a long time.
The quick background is Edgemont. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Edgemont is part of unincorporated Greenburgh. It's not a village. There are 7 villages in the town of Greenburgh, but Edgemont isn't one of them. But it does have its own school district. For the past 40 years or so, there have been various groups that have tried to make Edgemont the 7th village in the town of Greenburgh, which means that you'd have a localized government with localized land use responsible for their own police department and other services like highway and things like that. The most recent efforts started about 7 years ago with a group called the Edgemont Incorporation Committee. Mm-hmm. And that group had filed 2 different petitions. You need to file a petition. It has to be in compliance with some complicated laws that were written about 140 years ago, actually. And then it goes, if it's actually considered approved, at that point it goes to referendum. Unfortunately for the EIC, neither petition met the standards that are required under the law, and the Second Department Court of Appeals rejected both of those petitions.
Okay, so let's back up for a second here, Hugh, because there's a lot of complexity. If you're not from the unincorporated portion of Greenburgh, you don't know all this stuff. I should also explain that you're on this program representing yourself as an individual, but you happen to be a resident of Edgemont, that unincorporated piece of Greenburgh, and you're also the chair of the Town of Greenburgh Planning Board. We should tee that up at the beginning. And Carol Allen, you are a resident of Hartsdale, which is also part of the unincorporated segment within the Town of Greenburgh. And you are the chair of the Saving Greenburgh Coalition. Do I have it right?
That is correct.
So both of you are individuals living in this, I don't know how to describe it, except you're living in this non-municipality that has a name and an affiliation for taxation purposes with Greenburgh, but you are not, in fact, incorporated into your where you live is not incorporated into Greenburgh. Is that a fair description? So, you got to explain at the top why this even matters, because most of us live in a place, and it's the place.
Well, it's actually New York law. It's all over the place like that.
Right.
Unincorporated Greenburgh, for all intents and purposes, is a municipality in itself. It provides police protection. It provides highway. It provides all the planning and zoning, building inspectors, sanitation,
recreation, library.
So unincorporated Greenburgh is getting all those services from Greenburgh.
No. They're actually only unincorporated Greenburgh has those services. The rest of Greenburgh, which is about half of Greenburgh, which is the 6 villages, have their own services and get very few services from the town. The village's budget is about 4% of the tax bill from the villages goes to the town of Greenburgh. About 20% of the tax bill of Edgemont, Hartsdale, and everybody else goes to Greenburgh because we're the ones that support the services, and the services are only really for unincorporated Greenburgh, like, for instance, police, Theodore Young Community Center, the pool. Those are for Greenburgh only.
So
Certain,
is it fair to say that it's sort of is there a loose comparison between the structure of unincorporated Greenburgh and New York City, which has the five boroughs, or is that a bad analogy?
It's not comparable at all. The
Okay,
town of Greenburgh actually has 7 parts. There are
okay,
6 villages. Each village is incorporated as a village. And then the remainder of the town, which is called unincorporated Greenburgh. Approximately half of the population of the town of Greenburgh live in those 6 incorporated villages. And
So I thought it was more
approximately
than that.
half,
Carol, I thought it was
Mhm.
40,000 residents in Greenburgh and about 8,000 in Edgemont.
that's the unincorporated section of town that we're talking about.
ay
The
ay ay.
40,
Just
yeah,
like whoo.
right. Approximately half, just to keep the numbers simple. About half of the people live in the 6 villages, each of which is incorporated: Ardsley, Hastings, Dobbs Ferry, Irvington, Tarrytown, and Elmsford. The rest live in the unincorporated section, which includes the Edgemont area, the Hartsdale area, the Fairview area, the Manor Woods area, all that other area. Okay.
With all of that, forgive me for saying it so bluntly, but what's the big deal with Edgemont wanting to be a village?
do you want me to explain it or you, Carol? Either one.
Go ahead, Hugh.
It's very simple. Edgemont is by far the most affluent part of unincorporated Greenburgh. People in Edgemont pay about 24%, varies year to year, about 24% of the total tax revenue comes from Edgemont. We're only about 19% of the population, or 17% of the population.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from. So what people think in Edgemont, incorrectly by the way, they think they're unfair, or the EIC anyway thinks they're unfairly taxed because we're paying more than our population when services are always paid for by relative property values, and our property values are much higher than the rest of the towns.
Carol, you mentioned that there's multiple unincorporated areas. Edgemont is one of them. You mentioned Fairview and Hartsdale. Is that EIC, Edgemont Incorporation Committee, is that EIC only Edgemont, or do they have friends in Hartsdale and Fairview?
I have not encountered anyone in Hartsdale or Fairview who is a friend of the EIC. The Edgemont Incorporation Committee is a very small group of individuals who reside within the Edgemont area who
And
are
if they were successful,
pushing
you could
this.
potentially, right, but if they were successful, they could potentially have a village of Edgemont not part of the town of Greenburgh and still have unincorporated Greenburgh areas.
Yeah. Edgemont would still be part of the town of Greenburgh. They would become the 7th village in the town of Greenburgh. The unincorporated area, however, would be slightly smaller. Instead of being 48,000 people, about 8 of those would stay in the Edgemont section, and then there would be 40,000 of us left in the unincorporated section.
It's been
Okay.
stated that if Edgemont was successful in its legal maneuver, that the area would lose a profound amount of tax revenue. Now, it would be a stretch to say that it would bankrupt Greenburgh, but what kind of dent are we talking about if Edgemont just said, that's it, we're out of here?
First of all, I want to correct something. It's very important. It's not Edgemont. It is a unelected group of people who are petitioning for this. We have no idea how many people in Edgemont actually support this. Okay, so it's not Edgemont versus Greenburgh. That's something that the EIC likes to say, but it is really only the EIC, which is less than 25 active people. Okay, in terms of how would it hurt, it could bankrupt, or at least create a great curtailing of services in the town of Greenburgh. For example, Theodore Young gets about 25% of its tax revenue from Edgemont. If you pulled that away, it doesn't change the activities that go on there, would not change the overhead whatsoever, but you'd have to significantly curtail the services of Theodore Young, which is one of the lifebloods of Greenburgh, because it keeps kids off the street, gives them something to do, trains people for jobs, it does all sorts of things. Fantastic recreation program there. Swimming program was amazing. My daughter went through it, and you'd lose a lot of those services. And the same thing would happen with all the other services, because you couldn't put that tax burden on the rest of the remaining part of unincorporated Greenburgh. Okay, so you'd have to curtail services. It would be a disaster for the town, no doubt.
But even with that, just to play devil's advocate, the Edgemont taxpayers, or actually people involved in this, could say, well, why is it that we have to subsidize these different areas of Greenburgh? Why do we have to do that? And do they have a larger veto power on their taxes since they pay a significant amount of taxes as to how their money is being spent?
In general, the sentiment in our country is that the wealthy should pay their fair share of the taxes, and and therefore support people in the country who are not as wealthy. For Edgemont to break away, they're going against the sentiment of the majority of the people in our country who feel that the wealthy should pay their fair share of the taxes. And people in Edgemont do, in fact, enjoy all of the services that Greenburgh currently receives. They have the same excellent police service that we all have. They have the same excellent emergency medical services, ambulance. They have the same excellent sanitation that we have.
So then what don't they have that allows them to raise the specter of the possibility of incorporation in the first place?
They're missing the thing that on the masthead of the EIC, which is Village of Edgemont. Edgemont has become very, very wealthy over the last 10 to 15 years.
And it was never incorporated in the first place.
No.
So, Carol, I guess, sorry, I understand the concept of, taxation broadly is intended to effectuate some kind of a transfer and a sharing of resources across a large body of people. But they'll argue that they're not part of that body.
Anyone who argues that is wrong. They're not being truthful. Right?
So
the
that
same
brings us to
sanitation truck that comes up my street drives up Hugh Schwartz's street.
So if I
and
live
the same
in
streets
Edgemont,
of the EIC members.
and if I live in Edgemont, and if I live in Hartsdale, and I call the police, who responds to that call?
The Town of Greenburgh unincorporated area has a police department called Greenburgh Police Department, and they provide police services to Edgemont.
But Edgemont argues that if they
Time
were
out,
able
time
to
out,
get...
Ardina.
Go
Is
ahead,
that unincorporated police department a service provided by the Town of Greenburgh?
By the unincorporated Town of Greenburgh. Each of the 6 villages has their own police department and their own sanitation department and their own recreation departments.
Okay, so I'll just offer some opinion here. I live in another one of these town-village situations in Pelham, where we have the town of Pelham, the village of Pelham, Pelham Manor, and so we've got 3 municipalities in the space of 2 square miles. So I guess you could say there's no unincorporated Pelham, so I have no frame of reference for what you're talking about. Everybody here, is paying their taxes to Pelham, and they've got services, and there's duplications of services, and there's double this and double that, and there's lots of government in a very small space. I'm not sure that it's better, but what we don't have is this unincorporated gap area that seems to be left over in Greenburgh, which raises a tremendous question. But before we go too far, we need to talk about the current situation where there's and either of you, Hugh or Carol, if you can explain what has happened. There was a state law that was now been signed by the governor that says the standard has been raised for an unincorporated area to become its own municipality. They've sort of raised the bar a little bit. I guess the old way, if you were in an unincorporated area, you had to get some signatures on a petition, you had to have a public hearing, and you had to have a majority vote. Hugh alluded earlier that there has been no such vote in unincorporated Greenburgh. But that was how you would go about it. And I gather that that committee, the Edgemont Incorporation Committee, has been trying to do that for a while and has faced legal and other opposition. The new law says you also have to have an impact study, and you also have to have an approval from a statewide board. Well, that sounds, on the surface, that doesn't sound like such a bad idea. It should be kind of hard to create your own municipality. Everything was going along fine. One of you want to take it from there? Explain what happened?
Do you want me to start, Cal?
Yeah, Hugh, I see you moving your lips, so go ahead.
Okay.
So what happened?
What happened was there, as you probably may know, that the unincorporated part of Greenburgh has been split in terms of representation at the assemblyperson level. And most of unincorporated Greenburgh has Mary Jane Shemsky. Edgemont has Amy Poland. Okay. Back in June, when the legislation was passed but not signed, there was a letter agreement between Amy Poland and Andrea Stewart Cousins to exempt Edgemont in perpetuity from the new law. Not at Edgemont, all of Edgemont at that point. Okay. And the way they had done it, they've written into the law, it said anybody who signed, or anyone who had a petition, originally it was anyone who had a petition that had a signature on it before January 2024 would be exempt. Because that was to deal with petitions in process. But that wasn't good enough for them. They decided they wanted it in perpetuity. Then the governor signed the bill, and her signing statement changed that language to say the only people exempt from the new law were someone who really has something in process, which is someone who had already filed their petition with the town. Okay, and that was two towns in Rockland, and I think Orange County is the other one. Okay, that had done that. Okay, Edgemont, we still don't have a public petition. I've never seen it. They won't give it to me. So they've never filed anything. They haven't filed anything since 2019.
And what happened?
Then what happened was to codify the in perpetuity, a lobbyist hired by the EIC worked with Mr. Heasty, Ms. Stewart Cousins, and supposedly somebody in the governor's office to come to what's called a chapter amendment, which is how you modify a law that's already passed.
You mentioned Andrea Stewart Cousins. Who's the state senator for unincorporated Greenburgh?
Andrea Stewart Cousins.
Okay, that's what I thought. Keep going.
Okay. So what happened then was this chapter amendment actually exempts only people who witnessed the signatures of the petition from 2017 to 2019 from the new law. That's it. In fact, and people that already were having an election. Anybody else, including the other group in Rockland, Seven Springs, who had actually filed a petition, are not exempt from the new law after the chapter amendment passed, which was signed by the governor last week.
Okay, so this chapter amendment is not something I was really familiar with until you brought it to my attention. So a chapter amendment, I'm a non-attorney here. I'm assuming we are all non-attorneys. I don't know. I don't want to assume. My understanding of what a chapter amendment is the law's already passed. The provisions have already been agreed to and signed off by the governor, but we want to change one of them. So we passed a chapter amendment. And the chapter amendment effectively carved Edgemont out of the new law.
No, it
No.
didn't.
No, it didn't.
Carved about 25 people out of the new law. I, who never was not a witness or a signatory to either the 2017 or 2019 petitions, would not be exempt from the new law, even though I live in Edgemont.
Okay.
It's only about 25 people who actually witnessed one of those two petitions.
Right, but
That's
those
it.
25 people are what? EIC people who could potentially bring about this change, right? So effectively,
Yes.
they carved out the possible incorporation of Edgemont, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So, Hugh, you got played.
To say the least. It sounds
Carol,
like, you know, it sounds
got
like
You
played.
use the word played. You use the word played. I use the word betrayed. And I use the word betrayed because Senator Stuart Cousins stood in front of our assembled group last April and said to us, I cannot write a law that is just for one section of the state. I have to write a law that works for the entire state.
but wait,
But
wait a
yet
second.
she turned around and agreed to a chapter amendment that was very specific to a few individuals within her constituency.
This sounds like
So-
three-card Monty almost. I mean, this is like political three-card Monty. And what I'm trying to figure out is Edgemont has a population of 7,000. So how is it that 25 people can dictate the will of 7,000 people? How does...
Well, they're not dictating the will because the people in Edgemont will say, let's put it to a vote and see what happens.
Right.
But in fact, they are dictating the rules by which the remainder of the town gets to play.
But these are only 25 people. So how does that work?
You'd
That's a
have to
very
a-
good question.
You'd have to ask Andrew Stewart Cousins that question and Amy Poland. Because what it does, it is actually deprives the 7,000 people you're talking about of an opportunity to have an independent study done and an independent determination by a panel selected by the Attorney General, by Stewart Cousins herself, and the
State
Controller.
comptroller.
Yep.
So
They-
I
that's
want to
the
ask you
panel.
both. I want to ask you both this question. What's new here about this story? So a bunch of wealthy individuals wanted something from state government. They hired a lobbyist. And they got exactly what they wanted. So what's new here?
That is correct.
Well, I
What's
would
new
say
is
not,
the fact that go ahead.
I was going to say not yet. It's not over yet. I mean,
Right.
clearly what they did, in my view, is incredibly discriminatory. You talk about other areas. Imagine the wealthiest part of Manhattan deciding to become a village, if it could, become a village, okay, and leave the rest of New York high and dry. Or better yet, take New Rochelle. Take the Wackekill section and the Beach Hill section, right? Create a village between those two and leave New Rochelle with the downtown area.
Right, but those
Okay.
places are already incorporated. So it's not a really.
No, they're not.
I've heard,
No,
I've
no,
heard
no,
Feiner
no,
make
they're
this.
not.
I've heard Feiner make this argument. It's baloney because those places are already municipalities. So it doesn't.
No, they're
really,
not.
It
No,
doesn't
no, no,
apply.
no, no. No, you misunderstand. Wackekill section is part of the city of New Rochelle. Beach Hill is part of the city of New Rochelle. They could, okay, under a law like this, okay, incorporate themselves and pull out of the city of New Rochelle.
They're already
example.
incorporated, Hugh. They're already
No,
incorporated.
they're not. They're not. The only people incorporated there is the city of New Rochelle. The Wackekill section is not incorporated.
Well, what you're describing would be a secession. This is different.
no,
Edgemont
it's the
is
same
an
thing.
unincorporated place.
You're overthinking the unincorporated part. It is unincorporated Greenburgh is part of the town of Greenburgh. It is like having this very large. It's a town within the town. It just has never been established as such. In fact, I have proposed numerous times an unincorporated Greenburgh itself separated itself from Greenburgh, the same way the villages have, which would solve some of the problems because right now the villages get to vote on a budget that affects Carol and I, not them.
So you raised this, sort of looking at this through a racial lens. You mentioned that there's that component to it. 1 in 10 people is black or Latino in Edgemont. 1 in 4 in Greenburgh. Is that what this is? Is that what this whole thing is? Is that what this whole thing is? There's a sub-component of people in Edgemont that just don't want to fund a non-white community? Is that where we are?
You would have to ask them, but it certainly looks that way to an outsider.
Well, how does it look to you?
That's the way it looks to me. The wealthy people in Edgemont do not wish to be affiliated with the less wealthy people in the remainder of Greenburgh. They already have their own separate school system, which is predominantly, which has very few black and Hispanic residents in it. The demographics of their area, it's actually less than 10% black and Hispanic. When you look at Westchester as a whole, Edgemont section has significantly worse numbers as far as diversity than the remainder of the county. So you can't overlook the diversity, or shall I say the lack of diversity in the Edgemont section.
But they
a lot of this came about following a lawsuit which was filed because a developer wanted to build workforce housing in the Edgemont section. And Edgemont community spoke against it. The town did not approve the plans of the developer. The developer sued, saying that they were breaking discrimination laws, and the developer won. All right, so that was a major impetus behind the petitioning effort that got started back in 2017.
So this chapter law alludes to, I believe the chapter law put this exemption in place until 2040.
Correct.
So do we think there's any particular significance to that date 16 years out into the future?
Maybe that's how long the head of the EIC plans to live in Edgemont. I don't know. And he also plans to screw up a couple more petitions along the way and get them knocked down in court. That could be what it is. I don't know. What's very interesting is, the EIC complains about the current law, the old law, I should say, which they're under, requires the town supervisor to rule on the petition. The new law doesn't. Yet they're complaining about the supervisor. Well, which way do they want it? Independent person doing it? Or someone who, as much as he tries to be neutral, has a natural conflict of interest?
Is that date of 2040 also a way to just to kind of wear the opposition down? Because right now you're in court back and forth, and it's very, very expensive. So at some point your funds will run out. So
this is going to be I suspect this has been in court for a long time, and it'll continue to be in court. And I think 2040. I don't know. From looking at it from a distance, it looks to me like. Somebody wanted to give him enough time for Paul Feiner to finally be finished running Greenburgh, and enough time that most of the people who are here care about it right now will either be moved on to something else or dead and buried.
Right.
Or the legislators might have set their retirement dates in 2040. It's another possibility.
That's what it sounds like to me too, Carol. Mm-hmm. All righty, everybody. I don't think we're going to solve this one in the course of one episode of 914 Wired, but I certainly thank you both for coming on here today. Carol Allen, Hugh Schwartz, thank you for being our guest. And of course, to my co-host Ardina Seward, who sets up these interviews and teased up the details in advance, thank you. And Peter should be back next week.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate your time.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.